I think, first of all, Israel has lost its equilibrium, if it ever had any, in the sense that it is lashing out now against all components of Palestinian people.
Ever since resigning from the Palestinian Liberation Organization last year, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi remains an outspoken advocate for Palestinian rights. Today, as a fragile ceasefire holds between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, we spoke with the first woman to hold a seat in the highest executive body in Palestine and asked her on what needs to happen next in Gaza, the question of holding Israel accountable, and a new generation of outspoken voices challenging the media's narrative of their own struggle.
So the Israeli bombardment on Gaza left at least 248 Palestinians dead, including 66 children. On the Israeli side, 12 died from Hamas rockets. 2,000 buildings in Gaza were destroyed, according to Gaza's housing ministry. Over 52,000 Palestinians are now displaced within Gaza. What needs to happen now, in your opinion?
Well, a ceasefire, so-called ceasefire, I call it, cessation of hostilities, in the sense that an intervention to stop the violence, particularly against the captive and besieged Gaza and the totally vulnerable Palestinian population. This is essential because we want to save lives and we want to stop this horror, but it's not enough. Because if you keep doing this, every once in a while, every couple of years, Israel will launch a campaign against Gaza and will destroy Palestinians, and then the international community will intervene to have a ceasefire, and then they will have to rebuild. They haven't even rebuilt Gaza since the last 2014 assault on Gaza. What we need to do is stop this, and to stop it once and for all, you need to do things in broad terms. You need accountability for Israel, and you need protection for Palestine. You cannot maintain a situation of occupation and oppression and injustice against the Palestinian people. You cannot maintain Israel's impunity in place. You cannot maintain Israel being given preferential treatment with a sense of entitlement that it can do whatever it wants to the Palestinians and get away with it. And you cannot allow this apartheid colonial system to continue as is.
You're saying that Israel needs to be held accountable. Obviously, as you mentioned, Israel's argument or counter-argument is that it has a right to defend itself. This statement is staunchly supported by major global powers, including the United States, not to mention the fact that Israel receives $3 billion in military aid every year from the US, not to mention the weapon sales that are going to Israel from the US, from the European Union. So with all that in mind, who really is going to hold Israel accountable?
You see, the international community, including international regional organizations such as the EU, even the US, they have within their own legal system and the multilateral system instruments and mechanisms to hold Israel to account. What is lacking is the political will to do it. That's what is lacking. Okay, now Israel keeps repeating the refrain that this is self-defense precisely because it wants to avoid accountability. And this refrain is picked up by European and American officials in order to save Israel from the International Criminal Court. And this is the whole presentation of Israel, that they are being attacked somehow by one group, Hamas, which is quote unquote a terrorist group, and they are launching whatever thousands on innocent civilians in Israel. So they have totally reversed the situation, and they've presented themselves as people in a state of self-defense, and they've totally eradicated the whole concept of occupation, control, enslavement, apartheid, injustice, oppression, everything. They removed it because they want to maintain an exclusivity over being the victim. Because there's an emergence of a strong solidarity movement, because through social media, young people have been connected, because there's a commonality of oppression, like Black Lives Matter, like LGBTQ, like people who are also excluded and marginalized, indigenous people, and so on. There is this intersectionality and understanding of the Palestinian cause, particularly given the fact that the truth is coming out. Now, if you want to change course, and if you want to have a new language, then you cannot go back to the old language. Our relationship with Israel is sacrosanct. I'm tired of this religious language. Sacrosanct, why? I mean, this kind of language is no longer currency. It's no longer current in terms of the perceptions and attitudes of people all over the world. Governments, of course, as usual, lag behind the people. But when you see 150,000 people coming out in a demonstration in London, for example, or you see them in Chicago or in Michigan, in Detroit, or in Washington, New York, Houston, there is a sense of solidarity that is coming out, breaking taboos and making clear the solidarity with Palestine.
In a recent interview, you also said that the two-state solution is dead. I'd like to know what your view of the way forward is, and do you really think Israel is ready to ever accept a one-state solution?
No, I don't think Israel accepts either. The illogic is to expect Israel to be the gatekeeper and to have the veto. Because Israel has never implemented a single UN resolution at all since its creation. And Israel has always existed outside the law. So why do you expect Israel suddenly to become, a state that will respect others and human rights and international law and the multilateral system and the rules-based? No. Israel is the only country that legislated a basic law that says only Jews have the right to self-determination in this land, which is all of historical Palestine. Yeah, I see neither solution is applicable. Israel has destroyed the two-state solution. Israel is creating an apartheid, discriminatory, I don't even want to call it one state, because it wants to exercise sovereignty over all the land where there are Jews, but not, and they will do that, but they will deprive the Palestinians of sovereignty. I mean, it's ridiculous. There is no recipe. Israel has no solution. And we cannot base our solution on Israel. Only when Israel opens up, when this system of discrimination, repression, apartheid is dismantled, only then will you begin to see that there are opportunities of equalities and so on.
Mainstream media, when mainstream media tends to focus on the plight of the Palestinians, the discussion tends to kind of center around the fact that there is disunity, there is political divisions between Fatah and Hamas. However, what we've seen in the last few weeks on the ground, the level of activism that we've seen, the protests that we've seen inside Israel, the protests that we've seen in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, and even around the world supporting the Palestinian cause, as well as this new generation of voices, young Palestinian voices who are speaking out in the media and truly posing a challenge and not letting the media narrative shape their own struggle. Within all these layers, there is a strong level of unity, one can argue. So how do you see it? And do you think it can affect the politics or Palestinian politics moving forward?
Yeah, it should affect Palestinian politics, because the unity that you have is an organic unity now. What you are seeing is a spontaneous unity, particularly among the younger generation. And I look to them really for this new language and new policies. They're amazing. They are incredibly creative and courageous, and they know what they want. And in a sense, they give us hope, as opposed to the old system that has fossilized in many ways or calcified. But the unity that displayed itself spontaneously was expressed in action. This is the unity that's very significant, because Israel thought it had tamed Hamas. They said this openly. or it had subdued the Palestinians in the West Bank, or it had managed to normalize Israel in the eyes of the indigenous Palestinians in Israel, the 48 Palestinians, or it has managed to bribe the Palestinians of Jerusalem. None of these claims was true. And this movement proved that regardless of the nature of your oppression, whether you're in exile or you're on the land of Palestine, regardless of the nature of the oppression, you stand together as one nation and you define your rights. This is the important. That's why we're saying this younger generation is amazing. They're speaking up, they're standing up, they are defiant, they are fearless in many ways. And I think it's through this that you will see the new discourse, the new agenda coming out.